when I was in the Corps, probably the first school that I really, really enjoyed, once I got to my unit and got into a little bit more advanced level training, what we were tasked with doing was when we would go to those more advanced level, the non-basic level schools, we were kind of expected to come back and either train or assist in the training with the senior Marines that had done it before, just because we had a little bit of extra knowledge base to pass on to our teammates. And it was kind of cool. And I think that was where the bug really kind of bit me. It was there, it was lying in the undercurrent, but being able to come back and being, honestly, being junior to some guys that I quickly learned that if you put passion into it, if you knew what you were talking about, if you continued to study it, and if you really put energy into it, and did a good job, that you could gain respect from those that were even senior to you, and would listen. And I think that was my first shot at that. And I kind of like this, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed passing on that knowledge and information. There are universal things that those people can teach. A high-level special operations operator from the military has seen a greater frequency of violence, intense close quarters, lethal violence, than even the most seasoned police officer in the country has seen. Frequency. Typically, even over a long career, it's in high intensity, short duration. Whereas that person's seen violence, and there's a universal language of violence that's just throughout all humanity. So aspects of that, if that person's an effective teacher and communicator, they have a massive amount to share, even if they never did anything, even if they came home and put down their guns and say, I don't even carry a gun anymore, but I can teach you this about interhuman violence. There's a lot to be learned from that person. The problem comes in when that person can't switch to what's likely and what occurs here, and believes that their experience with violence universally 100% translates. But I asked them, I said, how many gunfights have they been in this country? How many have they been in against domestic American criminals? How many arrests have they made? How many felony arrests? Was there a massive amount those guys could teach us? Yes, there was. And they did. I said, but there has to be an adaptation. There has to be now, take their knowledge, pull from it what is relevant to what we do as police officers, and apply that to the best knowledge. You can't spend a week with a couple guys from Delta and decide you're going to pretend to be Delta. It doesn't work that way. Those guys honed that over years of very high level training, along with dozens of other dudes doing very high level training. It's not the same game.
If you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and consider, if you're able, to become a paid subscriber on defenders-live.com. Your support is the only way I'm able to continue doing this labor of love. And also, if you're looking for exceptional firearms and self-defense training, go to defenders-usa.com and look at the calendar to see what's coming to your area this year. I want to start this interview a little bit differently than how I normally do. Is normally I take you off the screen and then I read your bio and then I'm like, let's welcome Phill onto the show. And I don't think we need to do that anymore. I don't know. So will you be my guinea pig, Phill? We can just start a new tradition on the show. Yeah, let's
go for it. Because I think if people are interested enough or know or want to know more, the background info like that, you can grab off someone's website. I mean, you can see the same canned about me speech that everybody has.
I want to give some highlights though, because I think they're important to, I don't know, from a credibility standpoint, context. Yeah. Like who are we talking to? And so on your website, and this is where I'm taking this information from, actively engaged in the training and operational community for over 29 years. That is a remarkable career. And what I found most interesting is that you said that's where you found your passion to teach, which was that long ago. So I'm definitely, let's bookmark that because there's a really good opportunity for a great question right there. So you began as a Marine, and I'm not going to get all these acronyms right. So I think I'm going to need you right here alongside me to make sure that I get this right. So you might need to help me out here. But you began as a Marine assigned to Fast Company, conducting platoon level CQB training. That's where you started teaching. Yep. And then you moved up. Now, what is this? Lead MCIWS CSS. What's all that?
Well, that's not obvious.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's completely related. It's completely unrelated to the other thing. That is Marine Combat Instructor of Water Survival.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was we conducted the water swim qualifications for Marines and taught them how to essentially swim and not drown in their gear. And then we also performed essentially water safety functions in any waterborne operations if we weren't doing anything else.
Okay. So, and then completed your enlistment as a sergeant with the 1st Battalion 6?
1st Battalion 6 Marines. 1-6.
Okay. You guys you have your lingo, your language.
Everybody's, the Army's different than the Marines, and then the Air Force and the Navy, that's even worse. So,
So then you went from the Marine Corps to a police officer, and you were there for 14 years.
14 years full-time and still there now part-time. So
You're still there part-time.
Yeah, I'm there 24 years total. This is year 24 between full and part-time. So
wow. What is I should know this one. I should know this one, Phill. FTO. I should know that. What is
field training officer.
Field training officer. Okay. Patrol
So
field
we get the
training
rookies out of the academy.
Yeah. Instructor and SWAT. I do know what that is. Actually, I don't know if I know what that stands for.
Special weapons and tactics.
Thank you. This is a big education for me in acronyms.
It was originally Special Weapons Assault Team. That's what they wanted to call it, but they decided that was too scary back, even in the 60s. That was too scary of a name. So they thought that was a bad idea. You
know what? Right out of the gate, Phill, what I appreciate about you is that you have zero condescending tone about me not knowing any of this. And you're not, I've been around other guys like you that have backgrounds like you, and they have not been quite as kind. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Sure. That says a lot about you.
I wouldn't expect anyone to know outside of if you're in those units or those lives or jobs. Why would you know? There's a million career fields I don't know anything about, and I appreciate your curiosity. Most people just glaze over it and don't bother trying to get it right or care or worry about it. So
well, I think it's important, and it helps me understand who you are. So sure. Okay, and you served on one of the largest SWAT teams in Pennsylvania as an entry team leader and training coordinator. So teaching has just been part of your entire career, it looks like.
It has been. Yeah, it really has.
And then in 2014, you retired from full-time and you went to full-time police officer to the firearms industry. So you started a full-time training position, I guess, in 2014.
I actually started in 14. I moved over originally. My original jump over title was I was a director of corporate development at a large, that was right around the trend when gun shops were transitioning to having live fire ranges, having indoor ranges, and you were seeing the rise of the country club. And I got involved in a good operation early on as they expanded into an indoor range, a club facility, a membership, the training that was involved in that, and I came over on their side to work product development. So I was actually had hands in everything from retail to operations to you name it. So I did that for 4.5 years. Ended that tenure as the vice president of range and training was my official title when I was done.
I like that.
But then, as they say, elections have consequences. And the first time 45 got elected, the industry slumped pretty hard in the trailing 18 months, and those cool vice president jobs go away, and the neat corner offices and all expense paid trips to SHOT Show, all that dwindled away, and my position went away, and that's what that was the final little nudge out of the nest I needed to start Vigr training.
That's interesting. And you end the bio with always a student and never a master. I can only hope to deliver a fraction of the knowledge that I gained from the patriots with whom I train. I like that. Always a student and never a master. It's a great way to live life, I think.
It is.
Yeah. So let's get into the meat and potatoes now that everybody has a broad idea of who Phill Groff is. On your website, you said you found a passion for teaching 29 years ago, Phill. So I think I've always been a teacher at heart because I love to share things with people. And if I learn something new, I get excited about it and I want to help other people grow. But officially, as a firearms instructor, I'm a newbie pretty much because I didn't get my first certification as an instructor until 2020. And even then, I didn't know it. I didn't know a dang thing. And then more certifications after that. And so I would consider myself pretty green compared to you, Phill. So my question to you is, have you always had that passion for teaching? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have. The Marine Corps was the first place that I think it manifested itself professionally. But I've always viewed teaching and passing on knowledge kind of in a form of a leadership. I think it's branches of the same tree. Yeah. Leading and guiding, mentoring, and I've always had that. I was, I joke and say I lived the all-American, stable American family GI Joe kid upbringing. Two parent household my entire life. We lived in one home, had a good stable home, loving home. So I did the cliche stuff. I was the jock. I was the captain of the football team, senior class president. Gave the speech at graduation kind of deal, and had to, of course, end it with a nod to my future in the Marine Corps. Decided I wanted to be a Marine when I was 7, and stuck with that through all school, and enlisted the day I could. Had my parents sign off and went into the delayed entry program, went to boot camp 9 days after I graduated high school. I was still 17, turned 18 at boot camp, and off I went. But I think it was always there. When I was in the Corps, probably the first school that I really, really enjoyed once I got to my unit and got into a little bit more advanced level training. What we were tasked with doing was when we would go to those more advanced level, the non-basic level schools, we were kind of expected to come back and either train or assist in the training with the senior Marines that had done it before. Just because we had a little bit of extra knowledge base to pass on to our teammates. And it was kind of cool. And I think that was where the bug really kind of bit me. It was there. It was lying in the undercurrent, but being able to come back and being honestly being junior to some guys that if you I quickly learned that if you put passion into it, if you knew what you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
if you continue to study it, and if you really put energy into it,
Mm-hmm.
and did a good job, that
Yeah.
you could gain respect from those that were even senior to you,
Yeah.
and would listen. And I think that was my first shot at that. And I went, I kind of like this, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed passing on that knowledge and information.
And it never waned over that period of time. That's what I'm
Now
thinking. Really?
it took off from there. It changes, of course.
Okay.
It ebbs and it flows, and there are times when every instructor is going to have frustrations. For me, there continues to this day. I mean, there's things within the law enforcement community that we all know could be improved, and there are real fixes that are there, and they're not even hard. They're simple fixes, but to try to change the course of something as large as an entire industry that's set in its ways in that way can be frustrating. But no, it's always, it really hasn't slipped. I mean, I continue to evolve and change, and I think that's part of what keeps it interesting for me. Is I just what I first learned isn't what I still do. I look back and what I did in the 90s in the Marine Corps, and the tactics and the techniques and the base, if you will, the foundation. Much of that remains, but I'm so far evolved, I would say, from that. And I think that any trainer that's really on their game at all to any level continues to evolve and never stagnates.
That's what I was wondering. Did you have any difficulty? Like, it seems as though some people, maybe it's just the way that certain people are wired. It seems as though some people that have been in the training industry or former law enforcement or even current law enforcement that have been in it a long time, some of them struggle with changes. And I wonder, did you have that same problem? Did you have a resistance to some of the changes that happened? And what were some of those?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd be lying to say I didn't. I think it's natural human nature. I mean, by nature, I don't think anyone really likes change. I mean, not that much. I mean, we like our routines, we like patterns, particularly if you're in a positive place, we like staying there. I think if you take professions where you don't control your day-to-day life, professions like law enforcement, professions like the medical field, even to a degree, professions like teaching, where they can't know what a kid's gonna, where the kid's gonna come in that day to their kids all get 8 great hours of sleep and a nice square breakfast when they got up that morning, and all of them took the meds they're supposed to be taking, or none of that happened, and you're gonna have a completely off the wall classroom. I think that professions that don't control their day-to-day life are naturally more resistant to change. It's an interesting thing. We joke around it. If you look at cops, we talk about the professions that other cops marry, and there's only a couple. There's a handful, and they tend to be those professions I mentioned, or the majority of police marriages, and it's because of the unpredictable nature of work. So take those, they hate change even worse. So I'd be lying to say I wasn't resistant to some change. I think it took years for me to have maybe just the tiniest little shred of wisdom to realize when I was being pig-headed and not seeing the updates that were there, and the evolution that was right in front of us that needed to happen. Specific examples.
Yeah, like what stayed the same and what's changed?
Yeah. I think to me the biggest change, and this is one that I think I caught on maybe a little bit later than others, but I think I fully embrace it now. I don't think I know I do. I think we're just starting to understand more, particularly based on visually seeing what occurs in violent encounters, and we have the largest data set of that coming out of law enforcement with body-worn cameras. And cameras are nothing new. I mean, we played around with rudimentary helmet cams, even in my time when I was full-time, and that was starting to be in dash cams, where there's a camcorder on a rigged up, angle iron mount in a car, and you had to press the red record button and change out the tapes. That stuff was all there for us. But the amount of cameras and the proliferation of cameras now across society has allowed us unfettered access to violence from all levels, professionally, personally. And I think that's starting to show us what really happens in these encounters and how that interacts with how we set up and establish training for it. Prior to that, and for all human history, we relied on spoken word. And it was, we sat down after an event and around the proverbial fire and discussed what occurred. And that meant most of what we were dealing with were individual eyewitness accounts of that violence. It is my experience, it's a pretty well-known fact, if you want to take the least reliable information in any given criminal case, in any case of violence that happens with a human being, the least reliable factor in all of that's the human being, is the recollection and the individual memory. For years in the military and law enforcement, we just brushed it off as, well, no, we're above that. We're professional witnesses, and that was never true. We're subject to the same physiological, emotional, psychological impacts of critical incident stress. But I think that being able to now see it and then cross-reference that with what are we doing to address training relevant to what occurs in a fight, and how is that molding and changing? I really think that it's put us in a place where I like to say I genuinely believe that we're at the very beginning, call it the first 5 years of what will be looked at as a revolutionary period in self-defense training and application of force. And it's going to be because of what we see. And it throws away some of the old tropes and a lot of the old methodology that's born of the last, call it 70, 80 years that we've done. And I think that that's starting to give us a better understanding and allow us certainly an enormous amount of data to pour over and study and look what works and look what doesn't work. And then dive the next step deeper into what training programs produce those results. And can we see trending in programs where training was good and where training was insufficient or non-existent? And even in early observation, I would say that it's an obvious yes. There's events you can look at and go, that person clearly had a level of training above another. And given similar circumstances, they reacted differently and in many cases better. So I think that's the biggest change. And it's going to revolutionize, I think, a lot of the way we do things. Now, I don't think the baseline things, I think the way that you grip a pistol most efficiently isn't going to change. That's kind of mechanics and sort of is what it is until they develop new technology that wraps around our hand and, shoots around from the middle of our palm Spidey style. Technology's not going to change. I mean, a grip's not going to change, and some of those fundamentals are not necessarily going to change. I'll give you a great little spot example based on current tech. Our understanding of the visual interaction has gotten much better thanks to red dots, and it's allowed us to understand not only how to effectively shoot an RDS equipped pistol, which most people are in now. It's also allowed us to kind of finally put an end to most of the arguments about what our visual interactions were with conventional iron sights, with notch and post sights, and understanding how we were actually interacting with them in combative situations, in even competition situations, where time, urgency, and accuracy are a constant dance, and the priorities must go to the needs. And I think that's we're learning a lot from that. So
yeah, I've learned a ton from that because when I moved from iron sights to dot, the biggest surprise that I had was when I moved back to iron sights, I was a better shooter. And also one of the things I changed as an instructor is I no longer teach front sight focus because I think the data is there to prove that we aren't biologically hardwired to even be able under stress to focus on the front sight of a gun. We're going to focus on what's trying to kill us, I think. Yeah. And so why are we training that way?
Yeah. Particularly in the reactive phase. I mean, I think that there is a case to be made. If you need to make a shot that is the
precisely
equivalent of a bullseye, which is what so much of these tactics and techniques, and it's the tail wags the dog, if you will. And if you watch and if you track the history of the training and watch how, everything in law enforcement is in some form a derivative of military background, because the high number of military instructors that go, first off, the enormous difference in percentage of vets in law enforcement versus other careers, and then double that even more so amongst firearms instructors. So there's a heavily military influence, and depending on how the military is training at the time, that goes into it. And then enter into law enforcement, you have entities, not to knock them, this isn't a knock or a bash, but you have entities like the NRA who swoop in, and their main drive and focus was safety. It was bullseye driven, through the 60s and particularly into the 70s. As police training started to ramp and the NRA was running it, there was every range in the country at that time pretty much was run by red shirt NRA instructors, and it was all about control and safety and slow, and you have all the time in the world and all the axioms in the world of the speed's fine but accuracy is final and all that isn't really true, because fights speed gets a say in all fights too. So you saw that take over training and change the way we do things. So I think, sure, front sight focus. Yeah, for me, I'm front sight focus if I'm trying to shoot B8s at about 50 yards. Outside of that, you don't need it. It's the distance, and there's so many drills. And when you show shooters and blow their minds and show them visual interaction drills that say, hey, you don't have to have a perfect sight picture. The sights don't have to be perfect. In fact, they don't even have to be close to perfect. And as long as you input onto the trigger correctly. In other words, the simple act of getting the sights roughly where they need to be and then pressing the trigger without moving them, which is of course the hard part. Once that occurs, that individual, that fine sight picture, and so many new shooters and lesser experienced shooters will often come back and, it was my sights, man. I you know what it was? I know my front sight was just a little bit off. And actually, no, it really wasn't that. It was the fact that you have pretty aggressive pre-ignition movement and you're dumping the gun as you're pressing the trigger. And that has nothing to do with your sights. Your sights could be 4 times as bad as they were. And if your trigger press was good, you would have made a perfectly, you might have had a 9-ring hit instead of a 10-ring or a 10-ring instead of an X-ring, but you certainly would have still had your hit. So
yeah, that's interesting.
It's changing a lot. And I think all of that is, and for a positive, I think, like I said, we're at the front of a really exciting time, I believe. from little issues individually to big.
When I was on your YouTube channel, you said, I can't remember what video it was, but you said, I think this is really relevant, because you said one of your pet peeves is drilling and having like an entire segment of the class be about emergency reloads. And I have witnessed that, been a part of it many times.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that obviously we need to know how to do, but drilling it in that way, I'm not sure is the best use of our time for the relevance in self-defense. So could you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a slice.
And maybe even explain what that means. There might be some new people here that might not know what we're talking about.
I think really what that comment was born out of is something I call my 80-20 principle. And that is nothing more than just a personal philosophy I apply to all of my trainings. It's a filter I apply to ensure that I am spending 80% of my time and my resources on the most relevant and the most likely skills that are going to affect the outcome of whatever it is I'm training. So for me, for defensive pistol use, my 3 core skills, so what I think matters most, are getting the gun in the fight to the first hit. So urgency to first hit is something that you really can't train it enough. So urgency to first hit. I love a saying right now, right? Only hits count, but fastest hits win. So that's true. Yeah. So urgency to first hit. And then because of the ballistic limitations of a handgun, being able to keep the gun on target for multiple hits, because that's often going to be what's required to change behaviors. So keeping the gun on target shot to shot for multiple hits. And then finally, incorporation of realistic movement. How do we actually move? What's our movement interaction look like in a fight? And everything else beyond that. So an emergency reload. It's this fantasy that I'm going to be in a John Wick style gunfight, lined up with 6 magazines on my belt, and I'm going to go dry. And in fact, I'm going to go dry at the precise time my bad guy's going to go dry. We're stand there, we're going to go click, click, click on Glocks that, of course, don't click, but it's Hollywood. We're going to stand there toe to toe, click, click, click. And then it's a race to see who reloads faster and shoots and wins. And when you take a look, again, going back to the idea of being able to now see this anecdotal data, or not anecdotal, this real information, and you count the number of times you actually see emergency reloads, and you count the times that when you see an emergency reload, what is that person doing? And it's not standing flat-footed staring at an assailant who's also doing an emergency reload. And it's not a race. And if you distill that even further from the military side to the law enforcement side down to private citizen self-defense, and you start having to look really far and wide to ever find even a singular occurrence of an emergency reload being conducted in a gunfight. So you're going to train emergency reloads if you are going to carry multiple magazines to the line. If you're going to carry 3 magazines to the line, you're going to load one first, and if your load is purposeful, that's a repetition. And you're going to perform 2 emergency reloads until you empty those remaining 2 magazines. You've conducted sufficient repetitions for the skill. And as long as you have a baseline of understanding of how to do that skill. Now, if your gun goes empty and you look at it and you have to raise your hand for someone to come over and fix that for you, then you need additional instruction to get to a point of proficiency that you can do it by yourself. But once that occurs, the speed doesn't matter. Now, change context, and that can change very easily. When I shot production division, every 10 rounds you reload, every 9 rounds you're reloading the gun.
Yeah.
So there, you're reloading 4, 5, 6 times. And if you're working there, and when I shot production, I would work dry fire moving reloads, because we were never reloading flat-footed. You're trying to reload changing position. Then that becomes more of a relevant skill that I would do more for a specific purpose. But when we're talking about defensive application, it's nonsensical. And that can go even further to all kinds of topics. And it's this drive that people say, well, I have to be good at everything. Well, the reality slaps you in the face, though, and then in the same breath, that same person will always grumble that they don't have enough time to train. So if you don't have enough time to train to get good at the stuff that really matters, why are you wasting time on the things that can be trained organically and get some repetitions, emergency reloads, things of that nature, many reloads, malfunction clearances? You're concerned you have malfunction clearance issues, or you're not going to be good at it? Take 1 dummy round to the range every training session, and at some point during the day, put it in your gun. Or allow for the natural organics of malfunctions to occur and happen at the relevant percentages are going to occur. But so many people, like you said, so many people sidetrack their training, and because it's the flashy or what is perceived as the advanced skills, they invert, and they'll spend 80% of their time working on those tiny skills and have a 2.5 second draw. Well, your 2.5 second draw, you'd be far better off to work to get that to be a 125 draw or even a sub-second draw, because you're not going to pull off that. You're not going to pull off that perfect scenario, that perfect range, condition, speed. Based on the variables you're going to get in a real fight, you're going to have a percentage of that depending on those variables. So work on building a surplus of skill there, and not worry about the other stuff. Emergency reloads are one of my favorite. Maybe an even bigger target for me for the professional side are the lethal to lethal transitions. And I get a lot of shit. I mean, crap. I get a lot of crap from the professional users that how dare I say that we shouldn't be practicing transitions from rifle to pistol. And, don't you know that if this rifle goes down, but then again, go back to the body cam footage and see how often it occurs and when it occurs, what it looks like.
Well, and from a civilian standpoint, that's not going to be the likely not the case that we're going to have both available.
Well,
maybe, but
no, and it's not. I mean, it's if you take away,
unless it's active shooter and you have a rifle in your car and you go get it and you already have your handgun on you. That's the only.
That's one.
Yeah.
A home defense scenario, if you sleep in kit, which no one in the world ever has or does. We have, of course, the potential for zombies or North Korean paratroopers, but those are all pretty far flung. So I don't think we really should be seriously considering or training for that. Hey, and if you want to try, it's to me,
it's fun.
That starts to, it's it drifts into the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Which is out there, which is real. And I don't fault anyone. If you're honest with your student as an instructor, I have no fault with anyone that does that, as long as you're honest with them.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I'm a baseball fan. I would love to, every year, every Major League Baseball team, you can spend X amount of dollars. They'll get you a uniform. You go down for a week. You do spring training with the old retired guys that used to play, and you have a fantasy camp for a week and pretend you're a major leaguer. That sounds like a ton of fun to me.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I ever was in the major league, and I never will be in the major league. It's, and I can dress up and I can relive what I did in the military, or even cooler stuff. I can bang on the desk and pretend I'm inserting a helicopter and fast rope in with my night vision and blow doors off.
I'd sign up for that. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It's a ton of fun, but I'm not doing it now. And,
you know what else though? You know what is a ton of fun, Phill, that I think is actually relevant to a concealed carrier is low light training, low light, no light training. Sure. Very, very relevant for me. The training that I've had with Adam Lynch has been so helpful to learn how to not only handle the light correctly, but to understand how it works in low light and no light conditions and how to use it effectively for what I need to get done. And I also learned there is absolutely nothing scarier on planet Earth than going into a dark room that you do not know what is inside. And I would never, even if I had a gun, I would never, ever, ever want to do it. So that made me realize how important light really is.
Yeah, light's a great tool.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and it can be a great deterrent too, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I tell people when I train low light, I tell people it's probably going to be your number 2 used if you carry a quality light on your person. That will probably be your number 2 used tool that you will probably never actually use in conjunction with your gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it'll be used. For me, my numbers go this: my multi-tool gets used more often than anything else to open envelopes and use the pliers to tighten this down, and flashlight's number 2 to illuminate dark spaces. And I joke around and say you're the hero at the restaurant when the person next table over drops their glasses and you crack that light under the table, and you're basically you're James Bond at that point to them. That if you're not using it's a light brighter than the flashlight on your phone, so they're befuddled and amazed. But as far as actual use, like you said, going to be used more for deterrent than actual likelihood of being used in conjunction with a firearm. So, but for that, it's great. 1,000 lumens in someone's eyes is certainly a disruption to their ability to see clearly and make rational decisions. And at the same time, is a completely zero level use of force. There's no legal. You don't have to. Hey, call the police department. Shine a really bright flashlight in their face, and they're very upset with me. I just want to report this. So, no need.
Yeah. Are there any other training things that are trained over and over again that you don't see as part of the, what is it? Would it be part of the 80% or the 20? I got it confused.
Yeah. So I do. I think that for me, a big topic, like part of the 80% skills are movement. And I think that I have a bit of a passion for that subject. I wrote a white paper about it and put out some pretty interesting information. It's all available. It's on my website. Anyone can read it. And that was geared towards law enforcement. I actually did a presentation at TACON this year on the addendum to that, which was the civilian version, although there was a lot less data and a lot less fights to go off of there. But basically what I was studying was, how do we move in gunfights? What does that look like? How do we train it? And then how do we move it? And I think that for a lot of people, their movement training program is, again, a step from the past of what we used to do or how we used to train things, whether it was realistic or not. It's often a distillate of that training or a distillate of competition. And there's nothing wrong. Competition, I think, is a tremendous, and it should be in absolutely everyone's quiver in terms of their overall skill. Even if you say, listen, I never want to chase a trophy, a plaque, anything, I don't care. It's still one of the best tools you will ever find in terms of overall skill building for a defensive practitioner. So I don't want to in any way besmirch competition, but there are some movement patterns that people will change up and do differently in competition that they're less likely to do because it's a thought out process. I might want to move a certain way to get to a certain position faster. It's going to take me 2 steps less. That complexity wouldn't be available to me, and it's not a normal way that my human body would move. So to me, a lot of that, I think, is lies in the inefficiency of training. I'll give you a great spot example of it. If you look at defensive uses of shooting on the move. If you just look at the way human beings move, we very rarely move laterally. We don't maneuver like crabs. We don't move sideways while addressing something perpendicular to our path of movement. We simply don't do that. But when we train shooting on the move, I'll see a lot of training programs to this day that will apply an equal 25% amount of attention and rounds to front, back, left, and right. While the lateral movement is rarely ever, if very, very rarely ever seen. And when it's done, it's quick, it's fast. Offline movement's great, but it's not the way we traditional. It's not that slow, constant moving. And in fact, the pace is another thing. If you look at pacing, of course, the old, I shouldn't say old, the generally accepted is we only move as fast as we can accurately move, shoot, communicate, think, whatever you want to apply, whatever instructors put their spin on that until it's a fight. And then our body says, hey, you know what? I don't like the idea of someone charging at me with a knife. My body's not going to say, well, I tell you what, I'm going to go slow. I'm going to take this easy and slow. I'm only going to go slow as I can because I can't shoot that well if I'm really booking it. And it doesn't work.
That's such a good point. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. So like what I found and what I implement now in my training is we do move in different paces. When we generally move away from a threat, we move very quickly. If we back up and we do not disengage our hips, so in other words, our hips stay locked on threat, which is a behavioral possibility, hips and eyes, then more often than not, we need to be prepared to end up on our rear ends because our butts are all over on our heels, our center of balance shifts, we fall over. It has nothing to do with tripping, which is why every now and then you still run into the old time, like real tried and true NRA trainer who make people do like the weird lift their heels up while they're walking backwards nonsense. If you've ever seen it, it's hilarious. They look like
I've not seen that.
Just kick themselves in the ass so they don't trip and fall.
Oh,
we don't fall because we trip over objects. We fall because our center of gravity shifts, moving very, very quickly. Yeah. Now, what's better than that is opening and turning our hips offline and having some offline lateral movement while still distancing at a very fast, rapid engagement pace. Yeah. But that's going to require us to do something that's another evil boogeyman, and we're going to have to take a hand off the gun, and we're going to have to trail in hand and shoot one-handed. And now all of a sudden that starts looking, oh, hey,
I've seen a lot of that on real video, though.
Yeah, a lot, and it's fast. It's fast. It's intuitive. It's a technique I call a switchblade. I didn't invent it. That's just the term I use for my classes. But I call it a switch. I do a drill called the switchblade drill, where you're opening, turning your hips. Really, really effective. It's been used. I use the example that an agency that I'm have very close ties with, work professionally with for a lot of years. I had an officer involved shooting a couple of years ago where an officer successfully defended himself utilizing that technique, having never been trained in it. So it's very intuitive. And I've also been to an officer's funeral where a suspect used that technique against the officer and was successful. It's a very natural. It works, and I've seen it on both sides of the fence of good and bad where it works. But it's a very natural human movement. But that's done quickly. We do move forward towards threats from time to time. And that is typically when we are not under threat. And that's when we see the application of only moving as fast as we can shoot. There, it's very controlled, very accurate. So you're choosing to intercede in an active shooter, or you're choosing to intercede in, say, a convenience store armed robbery. And the bad guy's not focused on you. When the bad guy's not focused on you, then we do see people have the ability to move forward under control and make hits. But again, so when I train shooting on the move is one of the movement patterns that I train. I primarily, and 99% of my shooting on the move training is done away, fast and aggressive, forward control with very high accuracy constraints. So I'm looking to make, small target, high accuracy shots, and I allow the degree of difficulty of the shot to dictate my pace, and it's controlled and it's moving forward under control. But back, you're out of your mind if you think somebody charging at you with a knife is going to produce a slow Groucho walk and you're going to shoot. And furthermore, why are we still teaching any change in the way we move our feet? People love to talk about the concept of muscle memory or unconscious competence. Give me a skill more than walking that we have greater unconscious competence in, and there's none.
Right.
We've all been doing it since one on average. How dare any of us as trainers be so arrogant to think we can spend a couple hours with you on the range and tell you should move like a silent movie star from the 20s who, anyone under 60 doesn't know who the hell Groucho Marx to begin with. So you tell somebody to, walk like Groucho, and they look at you like, what?
Yeah.
They don't know anyway. So we got to come up with other cool names for it. But why would we think we're going to rewire a human being to walk in a different way than they've walked their entire lives? So to me, anytime we do that, we're wasting time on the range. And when we're wasting time on the range, we're being inefficient. We're in violation of that 80% rule. And then we should have a button on us that turns off our ability to ever complain about not having enough time to train. I don't want to hear it. If you're training inefficiently and if you're doing stupid things on the range and you're trying to be there purposefully, then don't complain. Now, I also think it's important that 20% of the time we address all skills necessary. Yeah. And I also allow 20% of the time to, go to the range, just have some fun.
Yeah.
Screw around, do some drills, do some stupid things that have no relevance, but are enjoyable, that make the day fun, and don't make it a grind and don't turn it into a job. Just have fun. Enjoy the sport. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So
yeah, totally. Let's see, where do I want to go next with you? We're running out of time, Phill. Firearms. Hey guys, I want to offer you something that is a personal touch, something special that I can share with you to help you grow and develop along this journey in this path as a defender. And what I'm offering is a monthly live call that you can participate in. And we're going to be talking about the 4 areas that I believe all defenders of life should be strong in. And those are physical fitness, emotional fitness, spiritual fitness, and training. So if you're interested in learning about those things and developing yourself throughout that journey, I'm here to help you. And I want my paid subscribers to have that personal touch of getting to talk with me one-on-one in this group call and sharing with others and encouraging others along this path. So if you'd like to get in on those calls, go to defenders-live.com, become a paid subscriber. I cannot wait to see you there. And thank you so much for your support of Defenders Live. This is interesting to me, the differences and similarities between civilian law enforcement and military training and why those differences matter. I believe that if we're not careful, we might divide people more than bring them together in the training community in these areas. And I think I've heard it said before that, oh man, you know the line. I know you know the line. What is it? Mission dictates the gear. Is that what it is? Mission dictates the gear. And the mission of a law enforcement officer is very, very different than the mission of a concealed carrier. In fact, the concealed carrier doesn't even have a mission. They just don't want to be a victim. That's really it at the end of the day.
The mission is keep yourself and your loved ones alive.
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
And unharmed. Yeah, that's it. This is something that I think is, and I think you're right. We do risk dividing, and I'll speak for the crew that I have the most experience with, and that was, my 4 years of service in the military. I can speak to what my era was, and that's it. But I can speak to law enforcement, and of all the groups that you mentioned, they are by far the ones that, by the nature of what they do, for good, bad, or indifferent, very much run the risk of that us versus them. We're our separate, isolated, shielded community, and what we do is our way, and get very opinionated. There's also a lot of cops who unfortunately get fed the wrong kind of support. And what I mean by that, everybody looks at cops and goes, oh man, 2020 happens, and they go, I don't want to do your job. Well, everybody hates you. Well, no, they don't. Most people don't have that open hate and contempt and disgust. And sure, plenty of people do. And depending on the environment you work in, maybe a greater than average number of people do. The actual biggest threat to cops, for many cops, in my opinion, are the people who do support us, because they don't have a real understanding of what it means to be a police officer, and they're blindly supportive, and they have a very gross misunderstanding of what the average police officer's capabilities and skill sets are. I tell cops all the time, the problem is, the unfortunate truth is that we're not what the public thinks we are in terms of skill level. Your average police officer, average. And this isn't to knock the men and women who bust their ass and put in extra time and actually do the job right and train. But unfortunately, I would say at this point right now in the career field, the majority of the officers do the bare minimum. And the public believes they are all on par with, midweight UFC fighters. They're all at least Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belts. I won't give them all black belts, but they're all brown belts. They can easily handle anyone, while simultaneously having the, fight ability, the punching, striking ability of just under Mike Tyson in his prime. And they're all USPSA, GM, Grandmaster. They're all GM shooters. They're all amazing. They all know tactics like the greatest. It's just not true. And that universal praise hurts the ability when we say, hey, we're not that. We need more training. Mm-hmm. And they say, hey, you guys are good. You guys are good. You're the heroes in blue. Thanks for your service, heroes. You're good. And that's equally harmful. But I think that to speak to the differences amongst the community, we all start kind of the food chain. If you look at the hierarchy, right? And the military represents the highest level of the food chain. So the military distills down into law enforcement, and there's tons of there's all kinds of books, and a lot has been written about the militarization of police. And I have some strong opinions on that, in that pieces of that are outstanding and pieces of that are absolutely terrible. And I think that some of my opinions aren't necessarily what the normal mainstream. I don't think wearing an external vest carrier and looking scary is a terrible militarization of law enforcement. I think not understanding what our jobs are is the biggest problem. Yeah. And then because so many of those people who are either of those things have filtered their way into the self-defense community, I think one of the biggest disservices happens when those trainers cannot disconnect the realities of what they did to what they're going to face. And I think that you can point to great examples, great and terrible examples on either side of that coin. Our friend we talked about earlier, I often point to Tim, and I give him this credit. I think Tim, to his credit, knowing what his background was, a Marine infantryman, and knowing his story, and knowing many Tim Kelly's, the Marine side of Tim. I know many of them, and very, very few will ever transition to being able to speak to non-military service members with the efficacy and ability to convey information relatably as Tim does. Far more that do that, far more struggle than get it right. And that happens at every level, from law enforcement to military to civilian, and continues to create that. No, you have to do it this way because this helped me stay alive in this situation. And but the situation wasn't the same. It was different. And I think that there's a relevance. Are there universal? There are universal things that those people can teach. A high level special operations operator from the military has seen a greater frequency of violence, intense close quarters, lethal violence, than even the most seasoned police officer in the country has seen. Frequency. Typically, even over a long career, it's in high intensity, short duration. Whereas that person's seen violence, and there's a universal language of violence that's just throughout all humanity. So aspects of that, if that person's an effective teacher and communicator, they have a massive amount to share, even if they never did anything, even if they came home and put down their guns and say, I don't even carry a gun anymore, but I can teach you this about interhuman violence. There's a lot to be learned from that person. The problem comes in when that person can't switch to what's likely and what occurs here, and believes that their experience with violence universally 100% translates. I think one of the best examples I viewed in my career, soon after I'd left full-time law enforcement, my SWAT team, the team that I was on, I did a training with a really, really great, reputable training company. I had a really wonderful week with those guys, and several of them had just left, had just separated from the highest levels of the American military. So they were high-level JSOC operators that were the best of the best. And they had the team changing tactics in this week they spent with them and switching up and obviously giving them what worked for them in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and all over the world, in high-level intense conflicts against multiple armed individuals who are coordinated with supporting arms and everything, and it worked against them. And their contention was, hey, if it works against them, it'll work against, this low-level drug dealer who's inside of a home with a pistol by himself or a sawed-off shotgun. So if it works for all those guys, it's got to work for this. And till the week was done, they had the team so screwed up in terms of the tactics that we had run for 20 years. And what they were now saying, and I came in a couple months after and was helping them out with training again, and they were still battling that between the two. And I asked them a very simple question. I said, guys, I'm not disrespecting their experience. They have more. I mean, they've been in a far greater magnitude of gunfights than this entire team combined, times a number of 50 to 100. Who knows? A lot. But I asked them. I said, how many gunfights have they been in this country? How many have they been in against domestic American criminals? How many arrests have they made? How many felony arrests? Was there a massive amount those guys could teach us? Yes, there was. And they did. I said, but there has to be an adaptation. There has to be now, take their knowledge, pull from it what is relevant to what we do as police officers, and apply that to the best knowledge. You can't spend a week with a couple guys from Delta and decide you're going to pretend to be Delta. It doesn't work that way. Those guys honed that skill over years of very high level training, along with dozens of other dudes doing very high level training. It's not the same game. And to the same extent, if you take that same thing and then boil it down and take that experienced police officer who on paper looks great, he's got a 25-year pedigree and he's a training sergeant of this and leads the academy and wrote the curriculum and yada, yada, yada. He might be a D-class USPSA shooter. And I'm not knocking D-class shooters, but he might not be great with this. But he, that dude who has a great pedigree on paper then comes down and goes, well, you're going to listen to me, civilians, because look how long I did this. Look at what I've done. You have to listen to what I say. This is the way to do it. And it may not be. And I think a lot of the industry, a lot of people unfortunately end up with bad experiences with people who can't adapt that training to what actually is relevant to them. Is real to them and is tangible to them. Yeah.
That's really helpful. I love the way that you describe that. You're really good at being able to take complex ideas and kind of distill them down into easily digestible information. I appreciate that about you. Yeah, so I think that adds to the responsibility of anyone who's hanging a shingle and saying that they're an instructor. And I like that you said that it doesn't matter who you are, based on your experience, you have something to offer. I have something to offer. Absolutely. A particular market of people, right? You have a lot to offer a particular market of people. But if I don't understand the relevance of what I know and be able to take out of it what is important and what's needed for that particular person's mission, so to speak, that we just talked about earlier, then I could lead them without meaning to even down a path that doesn't really help them in the long run. And so, I just thinking about that's the last thing I want to do. So, yeah.
Now, the good news is, I will say this, if as an instructor, you're hearing that, if this is even connecting to you on any level and you're asking that question, you're probably not part of the problem. Seriously, because those who are part of that problem would hear a line of discussion like this and go, that guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. My experience, I know what I'm talking about. and would brush it off. And it's that idea, it's that constant, I get accused, and admittedly so, of being a bit of a contrarian and not being unwilling to challenge the status quo or the way we've always done business and the way we've always done training. And I don't do it in a way to be disruptive or disrespectful to anyone's experience. And I always tell people, when I coach other instructors, and I have instructor trainer programs, which is kind of where I've manifested to that level, where that's a lot of what I do now is coaching other instructors as they start their journey and become FIs. I always coach and tell them, right, I bag on a lot of this stuff, not out of malice. I bag out of it. I bag on it because I've done it. And I had to learn from it. And what I tell people in my law enforcement firearms instructor program, the first thing I tell them Monday morning is kind of a crappy sales pitch. But I said, hey, when you're done this week, you're not going to be a good firearms instructor. You're just not going to be. I'm not going to make you a good instructor in a week. I'm going to turn you out of here with a piece of paper that says the state allows you to do it. For other cops, you can run your qualifications. But you're going to choose what kind of instructor you want to be. And if you just want to be a check in the box dude who's going to complete a form, do nothing to advance your officer's safety and make them better, then I can't stop you from that. I wish I could, but I can't. But I won't make you a good instructor in a week. If I do my job well, I'll turn you out here with a piece of paper from the state, and I will have placed you on a pathway. And the better job I do, the more lights I've turned on in that pathway. And understand that every light I flipped on that pathway was a bend or a curve in the path where I didn't necessarily have that light, so I stepped off and I screwed up for a while, and I had to do the wrong thing for a couple of years. So if I can share what I've done wrong, the mistakes I've made and areas where I've evolved and grown and said, I think there's a better way to do this now. That should be me flipping a light on for you, that hopefully you're going to get to where I am a lot faster, a lot more efficiently, and be able to surpass and push this game further than I have. So I'll put you on the path. I'll turn the lights on, but I tell them, you're going to walk every step, and you're going to choose to walk those steps. And those steps are experience. They're time on the range. They're free time in front of people that you're training with, and you're gonna step off the path. You're gonna step in shit. You're gonna step in mud. You're gonna step in puddles. You're gonna do make all those mistakes. But the more lights instructors can turn on for you to make that path more obvious, the better you are. So I think it's important to continue to constant question. And
that's why mentorship is so important, and having the right mentor is so important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier something about that you didn't feel as though the general public really understands what law enforcement go through day to day. And so what do you wish that people could understand a little bit more clearly about the life that first responders lead?
I would say twofold. One is we're just people. We're just humans. We're fallible. We have emotions. We're just people. We're not just like any profession. And I was joking around, I always ask people if they have a story for me about a cop. I always ask them, hey, what do you do for a living? And if they tell me, certain professions have it, many don't. If there's a television program about that profession, I say, do you watch so-and-so? And they're like, oh. I go, how accurately do they represent your profession? And it's universally understood that television never gets it even 1% right. I said the same is true of law enforcement, but the general perception of the public is we are what TV cops are. And we're not. We're none of that. I always tell young people it's simultaneously the greatest and worst job in the world. It will be the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and it is a slow burn on everything, particularly if you don't take care of yourself in a lot of different ways. That'll grind you down into the ground from the biggest city to the smallest town. You're going to see the underbelly of whatever that community is, and that's primarily what you're going to work in. And you're going to work, and I tell people, law enforcement is a sea of negativity, and the good cops are the ones who understand how to navigate those negative waters without being swallowed by them. And the cops who don't do as well or who have a lot of problems are often ones that get swallowed by that negativity. But it is the job. People don't call us, we don't typically get called if someone says, hey, I have an extra piece of cake at my son's bar mitzvah. Would you mind stopping by? We just can't finish it all. Please stop by and have that, officer. That's not why we're getting called. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, that's not what we're called. So we come for negative reasons. I tell people all the time, like if you're driving along and you're a good citizen, you have no interactions, there's nothing in your car, there's no reason to be worried about anything. You don't have an oh joy thought when you see the red and blues behind you. The first thought that goes through your brain isn't, yes, I get to talk to a cop today. It's how much is this going to cost me? Oh, yeah. Seriously, it's that fear. It's a negative interaction. You're going to come up and how much the road pirate's going to take today. It's always a negative. And even if we're there to help, because something's bad's happening. Yeah. It's probably your worst day of your life. And to the officer, it's just Tuesday. Yeah. And some forget that and some get negative of that. So it's a tough negative job. That'd be what I would say the public needs to know. And just know that, right, we're not TV cops, and that there are things that we need to be held accountable for and things we need to do as a profession better. I think as I transition to to old age now, because it's a profession where you're old young, even just a little bit less than the military. But it's wild how, the guys in their 40s are the old men. Like they're the out to pasture old men. And if you're still in the 50s and you haven't retired at 50 when you could have, why are you still here? And to be 60, are you out of your mind? Nah, crazy. And there are still cops out there. But it's a really odd profession, where anything else, now they're saying what average retirement age continues to bump up higher and higher and higher, and is pushing close into the early 70s now, where a lot of people are actually retiring. Whereas cops, most are 45 to 50 and you're out the door with your pension. So
does it just become as part of does it just become so much a part of who you are that it's hard to walk away from, in a way?
Yeah, I think once it gets into you, it's always in your fiber. But I know there are plenty of guys I know that there are officers I know that stepped away, and 6 months later you would never know. They would never tell anyone they were a police officer, and you would never know it. And then there are officers that 6 months later, you bump into them and you go, "How's retirement?" And they're like, "Well, I'm not retired. I went back to another department. I'm working part-time." And they're still in it. And I think that's the spread of anybody. You get some that go both ways. I think probably it sticks with everybody, at least to some degree. And then you see the jobs that cops go into after they retire. It's a lot of security positions, or someone go into whatever their side hustle was. That's what I always joke around. Every cop's got a side hustle to make some extra money. So mine was always in the training industry, so that's where I ended up. It kind of made sense. But
I'm glad you did, Phill.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I joke around. I say it's my Powerball job, right? And I tell people, you got a rare air where you can genuinely and honestly say, like, if you won Powerball tomorrow you win $300 million. What are you going to do? You're going to stay working. And everybody goes, "Oh, I'm modest. I would." No, you're not. You're quitting. You're not. And even if you own your own business, right? Owning your own business is no peach. That's 10 times more than working for someone.
Yeah.
So, so most people wouldn't continue to do what they're doing. But I think if you really found your calling, you say, what would you do? And honestly, I win Powerball tomorrow. I'm not going to teach. I'm on pace to probably hit about 60, probably between 60 and 65 classes this year is what it's going to probably shake out at. So I probably won't hustle at that level, but I'll probably build about $100 million training center and teach a half dozen classes a year, and split my time between Maui and the Costa del Sol and wherever else I decide to have a palace to live in. But I would still do this job in some way, shape, or form. So I think it's pretty cool, and I tell people like that's a cool thing in life to hit that. It makes work not work. It almost feels like it's cheating because it's too easy. So I enjoy it.
That's good. I'm glad you found that. Many people don't find that. So
I think the majority of people don't.
Yeah, so. I agree. I think we're both on a mission, maybe a little bit different in how we're getting there, but very similar in the heart behind it, I think, Sure. So I want everybody to go to your website. That white paper you described is on your website, isn't it?
It is if your desktop. Now, I can't.
Okay.
It won't be on the mobile version. So if you're on your phone, you won't be able to see it. But on the desktop, it should be right at the top. It says you can download it. And that is
okay.
Just pop that bad boy, download it for free.
Okay. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, it's Vigr Training, but without the O. So it's Vigr training.com. That's Phil's website. And there's a reason behind that. And I read it and I forget what it is.
It's It's Old Norse. It's a great story. I'll be brief. Well, as brief as I can be. You already figured that out.
You're good.
So I originally, the very first company I ever started for training was in 2004. I'm a young cop. I'd gone through Firearms instructor program like 3 years before that. I had experience. I thought I was an anti-terrorism Marine. I'm all full of myself. I'm like, I can teach these guys. The NRA comes out with continuing education requirements. Instructors had to do 24 hours of Con Ed every 3 years to get recertified. So I thought, well, there's a business opportunity. I'll start a business. I'll teach classes. I'll get guys their Con Ed. I'll provide better training than they do anyway. So let's launch it. So I started up. The name of that business is actually interesting now because there's a young officer out of Texas who now has that business name, and he's doing tremendous stuff with it. And I don't know his first name. I don't know him. And in the off chance he's listening to this, hey man, great job. Keep up the good work. I should send you some of the old swag from the previous Phalanx training group, because that was the business I started. But years later, I was working as an adjunct instructor for U.S. Shooting Academy in Tulsa, and I got a chance to spend a lot of time with Mike Seeklander. So Mike's a well-known name and a dude I learned a tremendous amount from, even in the brief amount of time that I got to spend teaching with him and shooting competitions, shooting a couple matches with him. But we were driving to, I think maybe the Arkansas State Championship match or something from Oklahoma. We had a pretty long drive, and we're talking about this business that I had started, Phalanx Training Group, and Mike, super smart guy, very analytical, but very direct. He's not going to pull punches or pat anything. And basically tells me that's a really stupid name for a company. I'm like, well, I mean, you're not supposed to be a more supportive friend here. Like, why? He's like, well, first off, no one knows what a Phalanx is. No one knows what a Phalanx, what's a Phalanx training group train? What are you training in? Who knows, right? No one's going to spell it correctly. I know you think it's cute because it's a play off the PH. Your name's PH, right? You think that's cool. And I'm a history buff, so of course this is pre 300. This is before Spartans were big. So I'm thinking it's cool. He's like, it's a dumb name. Even my mom thought it was a terrible. When I first told my mom the name, she told me I couldn't name a company that. I'm like, why not, Mom? And she said, well, it's another name for a penis. I'm like, no, that's phallus. This is a totally different thing. So I vow to I won't ever make this mistake. Says, you know what, Mike, you're right. It's a dumb name. And Mike's company, Shooting Performance. Hey, listen, he's teaching you performance shooting. I can't get any more direct in the name. It is what it is. So you're right, Mike. I'll take that lesson to heart. Fast forward now to 2018. I'm in the gun industry. We talked about the elections have consequences. My vice president position goes away. It went away a little bit faster and on a little bit less friendly terms than I wanted it to. So I was left in kind of a, hey, this has to happen real fast. And it had to happen. It was the right play. And I was appreciative for the opportunities that company provided for me. But it was time to jump out of the nest and start a company. Well, now this is 2018. So it's not 2004. It's not early GWAT. It's 2018. Every vet who got out has started a company with some variation of every tactical name on the planet. So within a couple days, and I mean, I got to start this business, get an LLC up and running in less than 4 days to get my first class under my belt and put food on the table. So I'm scrambling and I'm pulling a bunch of stuff and I'm like, well, you know what? I'm not Greek. I'm not Greek or Italian, so never really connected to the phalanx anyway, but I do have more Nordic lines. So let's check out every naming conventions out there. I'm like, let's just grab an Old Norse dictionary and start flipping through and see what I can find. Vikings are hot in 2018, right? Everybody's got to be a Viking warrior. So I start flipping through an Old Norse dictionary and I find Vigr, and I have no idea if it's pronounced that way. Who knows how it's actually pronounced in Old Norse? But it's Vigr and it means able in battle. And I was like, there it is. I'm
able in battle.
So I run it. I quick pull it on Facebook to family and friends. Everybody's like, yep, that's the winner. That's awesome. And I file it, I launch it, and I very quickly realized I made every mistake that Mike told me was stupid because it's not spelled like Vigr. No one knows what it is. Everyone thinks it's an acronym. They don't know. They don't know what it is. They don't know where it comes from. They don't know what it means. It tells you nothing about whether or not it's a firearms training business or not. It's just, and I'm like, damn, Mike's right. I did it again.
I did it again.
But in the interim of the time, I've come to the opinion since then, and I gave myself this one pass, and it was this. I tell people this all the time. If I train with you and if I do my job right, I don't care. I couldn't care less if you remember Vigr training or not.
Yeah.
But if someone says, hey, did you ever train with Phill Groff? I don't want them to go, no, have taken 3 classes with me, but go, no, I have no idea who that dude is.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm impactful, you'll remember my name. If you remember my company, and I think that across the industry, you can name the trainers. What they actually are doing business in their LLC, who knows? Who cares?
Right.
You just know names. And if you do your job well, they know your name and your business name is, how many people in the industry know people's names? And if you're really tight, if you're in the industry and you geek out on things like that, maybe you also know their company name, but who cares? Right. Very few people will say, well, I shouldn't say this like this. Very few people would say I trained with Rangemaster if they took a class with Tom Gibbons. Now, both those are correct statements. Now, other people obviously can teach on the Rangemaster banner as well. But if you train with Tom, you wouldn't say I trained with Rangemaster. You'd say I trained with Tom Gibbons. If you train with Masayu, I think it's Masayu Media Group or whatever his actual company name is. Or I don't know. You wouldn't say you trained with that company. You say I trained with Masayu. I trained with these guys. You trained with the name, not with some company name. So I thought, you know what? Mike's advice was right. It was a dumb name. Maybe even this is a dumb name.
I don't think it's a dumb name, Phill, and here's why. And I actually have a marketing and advertising business, so I'm not saying I'm an expert in this category at all, but this is just my opinion. I think it's interesting because it's different. And yes, maybe it's going to be hard to search, but there's ways around that. That's no big deal. But I like that it sticks in my brain because when Tim told me about you, he said it's Vigr training, but without the O. And I'm like, what? And then once I saw it written down, I'm like, oh, it's Vigr without the O. And if he would have just said Vigr training, it wouldn't have stopped my brain to have that hook. You know what I mean? Sure. It stopped my brain to have a hook. So then I remembered it better the next time. I'm sure there's some kind of neuroscience behind that. But for me, it made sense. So
listen, I'm rolling with your version now. I don't feel as bad again.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be looked at either way. And I would say in general, the marketing and advertising industry would tell you what Mike Seeklander said, but there are exceptions to every rule, Phill. Sure. And that's what's great about this world. So yeah. So go check him out on vigrtraining.com and below on the bottom of the page, if you're watching and not just listening, you can go to Vigr Training on Facebook and Instagram. And he also has a really good YouTube channel. I think you guys should check out. He's really, as you can tell by this interview, really good at presenting information, and his channel reflects that. It also was nice to actually see you demoing what you're talking about. It always raises a red flag in my mind whenever people are talking so expertly about a subject, but I don't ever see them demoing that. And so I could tell you're definitely pretty darn good shooter, Phill, for sure. You really know what you're talking about.
You don't demo, you're not an instructor. That's my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover, or any final thoughts for the audience? I mean, I have a whole other thing, a can of worms I could open up, but maybe I'll have you on again and open that one up for next time.
Okay. No, I'd say be smart, be efficient, be purposeful in training, but have fun.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Be my
and try to surround yourself with people you also enjoy as well. I think that.
Yeah, and if you want to get better, find people who are better than you, and then train with them and work with them, and a little bit of ego in this game isn't a bad thing. Don't ever let anyone tell you need to be absent of ego. A little bit of ego is okay, but you got to control it. So a little bit of competitive spirit. Nothing wrong with wanting to be the best at something.
Yeah.
Just don't be a jerk. So
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, Phill.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Fun.